Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Men and Sex. I'm your host, Mr. Wood, and today we've got a special episode. For those of you that are new listeners, this podcast is all about normalizing conversations around sexuality and all the different layers that come with that, whether it's sexual shadow, whether it's intimacy, relationship. In this podcast, we like to talk about the things that there aren't very many places to talk about them. Today, I've got a guest, Amber Kelly, dear friend of mine, and we are going to dive into the topic of how do men stay connected to their primal energy and their heart simultaneously. Amber Kelly is a sex and intimacy priestess and guides men to mastering their minds, their hearts, their eros through sacred sexuality and shadow work. Amber, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Now,
These are all topics that I could talk about all day.
I'm excited just to have you on the show to even ask you the question of helping us understand what it means to be a sex and intimacy priestess. This is
Mm.
terminology that's growing that I see more and more women speaking to. I imagine there's a lineage that it's connected to. And I would love to just start with an understanding of that so we can get a feeling of how you might actually be working with men.
Mm. Yeah. Um, well, this is something that has been birthed from a deep inner gnosis, um, from a place that kind of lives organically inside of me. It also was birthed from a place of noticing a gap where I was very much involved with like tantric circles and that community, sacred sexuality, conscious relating. And I saw that much of the containers for men and women were focused more toward women. And there was a titration down in order to provide a comfortability and a safe place for often the wounded feminine. What that kind of precluded or left out was the full spectrum of masculine expression, especially around sexuality. So I could feel like when I was in these containers with men, I could feel them like pushing up against this energetic ceiling of expression that they could feel it. I could feel it in my body. And I could tell them they were like pushing up against, and then there was discomfort there. And I said, there's got to be a place where women are present. Like there are plenty of men's groups, and this kind of alchemy, this kind of polarity isn't going to come up in the same way. So there's got to be women there, but there's got to be a large enough um, space held for the full masculine expression. And so I started playing with it within my own consciousness. Like, what could this look like? What would I want it to look like? What do I think would serve men the most? And then I started diving into the mythology of the priestess. And I started reading about other women who were modern priestesses. I started looking at uh, even just dating coaches, like secular dating coaches who were working with men and what they did, what they found, or were finding that worked, what I saw that men needed in the wider milieu of our social constructs and our culture and all the things. And I kind of just like brought all those threads together. The tantra, the sacred sexuality, the conscious relating, the modern therapizing, the shadow work, all of these different threads, and started weaving them together into my own offering, what felt true to me and what I felt I could hold with integrity. And
Hmm.
then I offered it, and it has been like the most beautiful thing.
I'm excited to have this conversation because I do think both aspects in this discussion are important, which is I think I just made a post about this the other day because I came back from a Sacred Sons event and I
Mhm.
said, Yes, it's important for men to have places to learn about emotional intelligence, but it's equally as important for places for us to be aggressive in a healthy way.
Yep.
And I think that that's something that's been missing in a lot of men's work is that aggressive side of things.
Hmm.
And so I'm excited to hold that pole as a man and working with that aggressive, more primal energy, and then to hear your experience as well on the other side, because I think that for me, when I am with a woman, depending on, there's different layers of intimacy that I can be with a woman, but when I get to really tap into that primal energy with a woman, it's so powerful in the way that being with men and like sacred combat or
Yep.
wrestling or being physical, even just arm wrestling, all these things feel so good.
Yeah.
And we live in a time where I was just talking about this the other day. It's really important that men have kind of swung to the softer side, being allies, boosting other people up. I see a lot of men in the men's community. It's like, here, stand on my shoulders, and here, you get to have more of a platform to speak, and I will take up less space.
Mhm.
There's been like a lot of positivity in that way. And something that we talk about in men's work is the unintended impacts.
Mhm.
The unintended impacts are there's a lot of very weak men in the world that don't
Mhm.
know how to tap into that powerful side of themselves. And I know like there's some controversy around Jordan Peterson, but that one of his quotes, he says, the strongest individuals are those who can be dangerous but choose not to be.
Mhm.
And I think that's so important for men today is that we know how to be strong, capable, even dangerous uh, and yet, then that's really where the strength comes from is that we are wielding it, we are harnessing, but
Mhm.
not that we just choose to be weak and not take up any space because all men have done all these bad things in the past, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a potency of us talking from both perspectives, whether it's in an intimate experience, whether it's masculine leadership, whatever it is. Um, I think it's a good segue for me, which is a huge part of my journey was realizing that I wasn't connected to this part of myself,
Mhm.
especially in intimate encounters. It was like the meekness, it was the
Yep.
little boyness. Oh, mom's here. This is, that mom boy energy is so easily shows up there. And it's been a huge propellant on my journey to step into my power.
Mhm.
um, so yeah, I'll pass it back to you with I said a bunch of stuff right there.
Mm. Yes. So I look at it as there's been a certain amount of cultural and sociological stimuli or impact on the masculine. And um, I see it starting, back in the 80s, 90s. But there's been a really powerful impetus for men to learn emotional intelligence, to learn how to communicate, to learn how to self-introspect, to learn how to be self-aware, and how their impact is being received by the people around them, and how to kind of manipulate that in ways that are healthy and holistic and wholesome for the people that they care about. And that's all been really beautiful. But because, and I say this with all the tenderness that I can muster, men watch women for how women want men to be. So much of what men do is for the women around them, and how much the women approve of them and love them and pull them closer. And so when the women aren't sure what they want, when they say, well, I want a man who's deeply emotional and able to be vulnerable, but I also want a man to be strong and warrior. And there's this big spectrum of what the women are asking for, which is a beautiful attribute of the feminine. It can be, there can be some like confusing cues sent to men. Um, and because we've kind of lost the subtleties of how men's brains work and women's brains work, there tends to be a lot of confusion, like battle of the sexes and all that stuff. Um, But what I see is what I see when I work with men is that there is this really beautiful reclamation of deep heart. And that comes on the tail end of men subjugating their heart to please the women around them, which sounds kind of counterintuitive, but to some degree, it is present with every man that I work with, even when they're deeply heart-led men. Like you could look at them and be, oh, they're so generous, they're so giving, they're so open, and they're so kind, and all of these things. Like they seem to be very heart-led, but it's often because they're shielding. So they're behaving, they're performing, but they aren't necessarily like fully embodied in their heart. And that becomes a really, really poignant, beautiful part of the work that I do with them is bringing the strong heart, like the warrior heart, back online. Like, yes, I give not to receive accolades, validation,
Mm,
connection. I simply just give
mm.
because it's my nature, like because I can't not. And so there's like this beautiful thing. And within that, um, being aware for the men and guiding the men into what does it feel like to receive? Like, what does it feel like to be conscious of the synergy that's happening when you give? And when that really lands for men, the caliber of women they choose to connect with shifts, where they may have in the past connected with women who really couldn't give back to them, who could only receive but not give. When it really lands, like that importance of receiving and that importance of being nourished in return, um, they up level on the kinds of women that they're willing to enter into intimate partnership with because they see the importance and they value the importance of them being nourished in return.
I want to tease this apart a little bit
Yeah.
because I think it's such an important thing that's playing out in this dynamic, which is men showing up, like you said, really led by what is the woman wanting.
Hmm. Yeah.
And men, from my experience, they so badly want to be nourished.
Hmm.
And so we're in this really interesting experience that I see is that women are feeling, obviously, we're talking huge generalizations here.
Yeah.
A lot of women are feeling very overwhelmed and they don't have a lot to give.
Hmm.
And then the men are feeling very unnourished.
Hmm.
And this is kind of the dynamic at play. And what it really turns into is like this story that we tell that men want sex more than women. And so then there's these,
Yeah.
that's the story that's told
Hmm.
because something's going on in the generalization. Women are, what I'm seeing is like, are in the relational dynamic, not in this place to just give and nourish. And then men are kind of getting hungry and taking.
Hmm.
And like, and then that's kind of where the dynamic freezes.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective what you see in there
Mm.
with you, some of the elements that you just spoke to.
Yeah. Yeah. This is super juicy. Um, So one thing I want to be really clear about is that the work that I do with men, and I work with women as well, mostly with men, none of what I ask the men to do is different than what I've done for myself. So when I ask them to do something, to do a practice, to do a shadow work, to take a look at something that I think they're tangled up about in a way that isn't actually propelling them toward the life that they desire, it's not anything outside of what I do with myself on the daily. Um, so when I see this dynamic of you have the nourishment that I desire, um, you're not willing to give it to me, and therefore you're overwhelmed. I'm starving. You feel like I'm taking. I feel like I'm gonna die if I don't get the thing. Like in this like this patterning that we get into that can, like you said, it can kind of freeze us up. And then maybe we'll be like, well, maybe it's time for a new partner.
Totally.
Maybe the next person will be the thing that, and then you get right back into that rut. So, in my experience, there is an important factor that has to happen before you ever approach a relationship. And that is you have to tune into your own sense of, I'm going to call it divinity, but it can be looked at as your own like physicality, but your own metaphysicality. So it's the ways that you are nourished from everything, from
Ooh.
the divine, if you feel that way, from the earth, if you feel that way, from the sunlight, if you feel that way, from taking time with your food, if you feel that way. And when you can open up to many, many challenges or many, channels of nourishment, the person that you're looking at in front of you becomes a less important channel. They can still channel and they should still channel, but they become not as, it's not as rigid. So when we can be in that place of, I know how to seek nourishment from human and divine, that frees up a lot of the rigidity that we can sometimes find. So that would be the first step. Then um, there is an aspect of hmm, the skill of really being able to be with the person that you're with. So, and that goes everything from early in the connection, being able to ascertain whether this person is actually in alignment with you, all the way to how am I cutting myself off from nourishment from this person because it's not in the exact flavor that I picture it needs to be. I think something that often happens early in a connection is that we feel that like all the hormonal rush and everything, we get really excited about this person. We're very attracted. The chemistry is there. The like we're magnetic, and we want to just like grab this person and put them inside of our skin. And that tends
Totally.
to
We're trying our best, definitely, to put them inside of our skin.
that can overshadow misalignments that are important. It can overshadow important conversations. How do you deal with conflict? What are the ways that you show love? What are the ways that you receive love? How do you like to spend your downtime? Like all of these different conversation topics that need to happen somewhat outside of the container of the chemistry so that we can ascertain compatibility, we can identify whether we have similar goals and all of that stuff. And then we can orient them um, organically in our lives. We don't have to pull them closer than what's organic between us and this other person. Um, and then we avoid creating expectations and disappointment. And that's like really high level emotional intelligence because this is being able to think outside of that biological imperative, which can be pretty hard.
I think the one that the what really lands for me is the nourishment from many channels
Mhm.
because I think this is a huge one that happens, especially in longer term relationships,
Mhm.
because there's a strong pattern once again, generally, where we're having the amount of sex and intimacy that I'll speak for men, particularly that we like at the beginning of a relationship. It's
Mhm.
like, yeah, it's just amazing. We're just so nourished. We're so much oxytocin, so much
Yeah.
serotonin, all this amazing chemistry, chemicals. And then time goes on, we get 1 year, we get 2 years, and then all this stuff starts to show up and
Mhm.
animus, projections, et cetera, not dealing with the conflicts as they arise and they start to compile, and then the intimacy starts to go away. The
Yeah.
sexuality starts to go away. And what I see in myself as a pattern in so many men is when we're getting that rich nourishment from our feminine partners, we're not staying connected to as many channels as we could be.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
It's very compelling nourishment.
oh yeah, and it's like, I mean, I remember myself in my last long-term relationship was like, I don't need to go to men's group. I don't need to go do this.
I
I
feel
just
great.
want to go get my nourishment. And in particular, one of the things that I think is really huge for men is that most men haven't learned how to nourish themselves in their own pleasure.
Mhm.
Like there's been huge movements of self-pleasure in for females and for women.
Mhm.
Very a lot less for men, and I think men just do not know very well how to cultivate that nourishment of pleasure for ourselves.
Mhm.
And so it's so good when we're with a partner and it's like, meh, kind of so by ourselves, like very repetitious, habitual crotch sneeze, short kind of experience. And so there's this huge divide, and that makes us dependent upon the nourishment we feel, especially in those intimate experiences. So
Yeah.
this one is huge for me as far as the dynamic of women being malnourished, them not having the space or capacity to give any of that nourishment to their partners, and then hey, here we are, both kind of in a stalemate.
Yeah. Yeah. What comes up for me in that is like if you look at something like the love language paradigm, um uh touch, like sex is usually a very strong dialect of the touch love language for men. Um, and it's almost a like a trope for men, like, oh, men only want one thing, blah, 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 all that stuff. But if you look at it from a developmental kind of cultural aspect, you can see that through adolescence, most boys are trained to only receive touch nourishment through sex. So they don't really hug, they don't really cuddle, they don't really hold hands, they don't really do all these things, or they don't bring the presence of body to that thing that will actually open up their ability to receive nourishment from it. Um, and so that what that does is that just creates synapses in the brain of saying, okay, my body is signaling or my brain is signaling that I need nourishment. It's got to be sex. And
Totally.
that really does drain, that can drain the feminine, like when there's nothing else. But what I find in my work with men when I do the 3 day immersions with them is it's really like we slow it down and pull apart those moments and hold any desire for sexuality or desire for sexual stimuli. Just hold it and let it kind of loosen and unravel. And what I find, like, and this is like lived experiential like proof because we do it, is that through simple touch, like, and that can just be me being in deep feminine energy with the man that I'm sitting across from without any erotic energy flowing at all. But just being with them and just like even just holding hands or touching a face or something like that can be so profoundly nourishing for the masculine when it comes from deep feminine presence. And what that proves to their body is that they actually receive nourishment in many, many ways. They've just created almost a habitual pattern of only recognizing it through sex.
Mm.
But when there's a recognition, when there's a loosening of those definitions, it can become, um, they can become like that what you were pointing at, like that beautiful, like I'm so full, I have all this nourishment, I feel great. and that can become the standard. Like that becomes where they live.
I think this is a beautiful thread to the conversation that we were having before the call, which is uh, we were talking about how when we start to look at arousal and being turned on, that so much of it is about feeling alive.
Mhm.
And then as we start to play with it in different ways, even something like nervousness can feel like
Mhm.
vitality, can feel like aliveness. And I feel very similarly with nourishment. It's the same practice is I can tap into right now and take a breath and be like, whoa, that's so nourishing.
Yeah.
I can feel the sun on my skin, and be like, wow, that's so nourishing. But once again, it's like a programming of the mind
Mhm.
that's connected something with that feeling.
Mhm.
It's like programming it in. Oh, wow. I can, like, as a man, I can find subtle nourishment in so many different areas. Maybe it doesn't feel as rich and full as an intimate experience with a woman that I'm attracted to.
Mhm.
But when I add together all the subtle nourishment in other areas, whether it's more consciousness in the food that I'm eating, more consciousness in the water that I'm drinking, more subtle touch with myself, with friends, with other people that's not fully intimate. But now I have more nourishment and I'm less needy when I go to that very uh, tantalizing well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think um beyond that, because I can anticipate that this sounds like shit to some men. Like just learn how to be nourished in other ways. um and that like that idea or that reaction, like I love when those kinds of things come up. When men push back against what I'm inviting them into, because then I know we're getting to that edge of that internal belief system, and that once we can kind of um, gently and relentlessly push into that until it releases, there's such profound treasure on the other side of that. Um, but as they are increasing their capacity to receive uh, nourishment in lots of different ways, they also increase their capacity to receive nourishment in that way, like
Yeah.
through sexuality and through sexual expression. They can hold much more because there's been that expansion and the excavation of all of the ways that they block the way that they receive. So that like create that goes from like I have a bucket of what I can receive to I have an aquifer of what I can receive,
Ooh,
and you
love
get to
that.
live in that aquifer, and that becomes a place where creativity can happen. Like like what, okay, here's the situation right now, what can I create with these, like with this moment, what can I create? And that becomes an even more rich place to live from, because you don't have to make sure everything around you is behaving properly in order for you
Ooh,
to receive.
ooh.
You just get to receive with what is.
I think this is a good segue into what we came here to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think there's a strong thread here between a phrase you said at the beginning that was really powerful was heartless primal.
Mm,
And I imagine that a lot of the heartless primal energy is correlated to malnutrition or fear of not getting my needs met or my you talked about an aquifer. It's like the amount that I can actually receive is tiny. So I just need more and more and more and more all the time because I can't actually retain any of it. So
yeah.
I'd love to thread into this subject of the heartless primal and how we see that in the world and how that's demonized and how that's impacted healthy primal energy so that we can move in our way into that heart-centered primal energy.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Um, this is one of my favorite subjects, and it is consistently the feedback that I get from the men that I do immersions with. Like, this is the major pivot point in the work that I do with them. And that is the heart-led. primal. Um, for the most part, the primal masculine has been villainized, demonized through history, like long before we were around, because of the damage that it has the capacity to do, because of the damage that was done. Like there, we know and women often carry the DNA memory of the damage that it can do. So when the feminine is avoiding healing that and taking on that challenge and confronting her own internal narratives, she can subconsciously or outright emasculate the men around her, so she doesn't feel threatened in that way. So there's responsibility on both sides. But when a man is grappling, usually somewhere around late puberty, like 17, 18, 19, something like that, they may have this like primal drive come online. And then they scan, they look around. How do I see this operating in the world? How do I see this being received in the world? Do I even see a place for this in the world? And for the most part, they don't. They may see that their interpretation of primal masculine might be seeing men doing terrible things, like being out of control. And then they may see that the women around them have no capacity to hold clean primal energy from the masculine. So they're gathering, they're observing these messages both locally and globally because we have the internet now. Um, and then they are building a structure in which their primal can exist. And often that structure is a very, very small cage. And it's constantly having to be like shored up and like squished into this tiny cage because it's a dangerous thing. Um, and when I started developing the work that I do with men, I knew that was going to have to be an integral part, and I wanted to do it well. And what I saw, or what I observed in my own self, coming from the wounded feminine, and then coming into a more healed orientation myself toward the masculine primal and finding that I deeply craved the masculine primal, like deeply craved the masculine primal, but I needed it. I wanted and needed it to come in a way that was very clean. I didn't have any tolerance for it to come in a way that was um, full of distortion and shadow and things like that. I didn't have interest in that. So I reverse engineered and said, okay, how could I, feeling this priestess call, how could I lead a man deeply into his heart? Like show him what it can feel like to be in that really beautiful, like service king position, that orientation of power and generosity, of love and worship and grounded dominance, leading him into that place and letting him feel it for himself, and then bringing the primal and anchoring those two together so that as the primal is allowed to express and encouraged to express, it is steeped in this deep heart energy. And to where, and the beauty I think of more women stepping into this priestess path is that we are the barometers of how well a man is connected to heart and primal because we feel it in our bodies. So if we can be in tune enough with our bodies and open to where they are, we can help them navigate because it can be pretty shaky at first. It can be pretty crunchy at first. It's not going to happen beautifully, perfectly the first time. So as priestess, holding that frequency of I'm welcoming you, I'm initiating you, I'm inviting you into this place of heart-led primal. You are relying on how my body feels in order to help you orient around the true expression of your heart-led primal. And I am open to giving you, I'm open to guiding you in this way gently and lovingly and relentlessly until you find that beautiful, like organic place that you can stand in this like integrated power.
Hmm. You talked about, and I'm a firm believer in this, you know, so much of what I see in the men's work world is let me dangle the shiny, pleasurable thing in front of you. Oh, become multi-orgasmic and last for hours. And it's
Mhm.
like, what about that guy doing his inner work around his mother wounds or around his rejection? You
Yeah.
know, this this foundational work that's so needed to get that shiny thing, to get to
Mhm.
that place. And I feel like, we talked about that earlier is in order to get that heart connected primal, it's this oscillation between tapping into that energy when I am aroused in one way. One way to think about it is sexually, but it could be just physically aroused.
Mhm.
And simultaneously, whether I'm in my men's group, whether I'm working with a coach, whether I'm working with a priestess, whoever I'm working with, that the importance of doing the shadow work, cleaning up what's going on inside in order to be that heart connected primal.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the issue is we don't control the people we're with.
Yep.
If I'm married, if I'm in a long-term relationship and I'm like, man, I want to get in touch with my primal, I want to get into some heart-connected primal energy. Well, my partner, let's say she's a woman, if she's got incredible wounds around the heartless primal,
Mhm.
I can't force her to navigate that. And I have no idea what her timeline is going to be with that.
Mhm.
But I truly believe that we'll talk about the men for now.
Mhm.
I believe that the more that we're on that path, getting more connected to our hearts, getting more emotional intelligence, all of this inner work stuff, shadow work, however we want to say it,
Mhm.
and I'm really strengthening my connection to the primal energy, I feel like it's so important for me to just know that me focusing on myself will have an impact. Do I know to what extent? No. But the
Mhm.
best thing that I can do as a man is focus on myself and connecting to my heart, connecting to that primal energy. And whenever my mind goes to, yeah, but my partner, she's this. Yeah, my
Yeah.
partner, she's never going to do this. That's
Yeah.
like leaky energy. That's not me being in that masculine pole of like penetrating and going towards the thing that I'm wanting to create for myself. What would you
Mhm.
say about that?
Mm. A lot. Um, when a man steps into this deep work, I never promise him that his relationship is going to survive. Sometimes people form bonds within a certain paradigm that needs to fade away. And I don't villainize or demonize the breaking up of a family or I'm sorry, of a couple. Obviously, that has repercussions, that has a deep level, that requires a deep level of consideration and all that stuff. But I don't find virtue in saying we're going to save your marriage right now. Like that doesn't feel correct to me. Um, that being said, when I have had clients come to me and being like, "Well, I want to move into this like fully integrated masculine blah 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 blah," but my partner and he, there's a um an outsourcing of the onus of the problem there, so that kind of raises an orange flag for me first. When we actually dive into it and I'll even speak with her because I want her perspective, like what's actually happening in these moments where you feel where he's wanting to move into this fuller expression or fuller spectrum of expression. And what she will report to me is that, oh, whenever he does that, he fully checks out. Like his energy leaves the room. And I'm like, oh, then we need to teach him attunement. Like we need to teach him to stay present in his body. And what I have found with working with women and working with men who love women, women are so multifaceted and and beautifully complex in
Yeah.
our sexual expression
Yeah.
that if a man can master attunement, when he can master when the moments come up that she needs my reassurance that I'm still right here, if he can master that, she will go almost anywhere. And I work with single and I work with married men, and this happens all the time. It's even there's even scientific studies that show that women are vastly more um, stimulated or aroused by a much wider range of stimuli than men are.
Yeah.
We are, if either of us is the more sexual member of the species, it's women. But we don't always, we aren't always able to be connected, be fully connected to that because of many, many different things. But the beauty of what men can offer is that when they can bring deep attunement and a grounded nature into their body, into that experience, to the point where it just is like oozing out of their pores, where she cannot deny that it is there. She becomes like you you need more no more novelty than that. She will go from tender to primal to slut to sacred whore to like anything. She can go anywhere with that. It's like holding a kite that extends into the universe. And the man becomes the one who's holding the kite and grounding into the earth while his woman is able to go explore the cosmos. And with that skill, with that beauty, with that gift that he can give, he gets to have all of the sexual gratification that he could probably handle and more.
Oh, I love this kite analogy, metaphor, and it's so true. And so much of what you're saying and what we're talking about and what I continually come back to is that we really are in this together.
Mhm,
We face different challenges as men and women and different things in our lineage and different layers of things,
mhm.
but really what we want requires us working together.
Yeah. Well, we can do all of this alone. It's going to take much longer. It's going to be much harder to get to these places. And once we are in relationship, it will probably come up again anyway, because that's the beauty, like that's the gift of intimate relationship is that is the place of alchemy for all of this. So as beautiful as the work is that we can do on our own, and we
Yeah.
should, um, it's like the hot refiner's fire of intimate relationship where we really land it.
Now, we talked about it a little bit, but let's go back to it just again because I know it's such a deep subject. We can't, we can just touch a piece of it on this podcast episode, but one of the questions is how to get to heart-led primal.
Mm-hmm.
So once again, I know that's be a whole week, a whole week's experience, many, many hours to talk about, but what can you share about being a man and getting to your heart-led primal?
I like this question. For me, it's determining. So I work with this paradigm that I developed called head, heart, cock cohesion. And these are three wisdom centers that exist within the masculine existence that when working together, um, you can have the answer to almost any issue that comes up in your life. What usually happens is there's one of those wisdom centers that's more deeply relied upon, and the other two typically atrophy. So, if early in childhood you were celebrated for how intelligent you are, all of the accomplishments on the outer side of the world, the ways that you were able to manipulate the world with your intelligence, all those things, you may be more head led. Um, if in early childhood you were celebrated for your sweetness and the ways that you attuned to everybody around you and the ways that you manipulated and like caretake all of the people around you, you're probably a little bit more heart led, but it's probably performative. Um, if you're there's and then there's the cock led. A lot of men grow through adolescence and they say, well, the conquests, my sexual conquests are what give me value. How many women I'm able to seduce and the caliber of women that I'm able to seduce and how effectively I can seduce them. Like that's where I get my validation and my value. So that's more cock led. But again, it's performative and it's not fully nourishing. There's always another conquest. There's always more to do. So once I work with a man and we kind of figure out where he's starting from and what may be atrophied for him, then we start to kind of stir the sediment of the other two. If it's the heart, which usually the heart needs some work, some attention, um, I have several practices that I use to move them into giving more attention to what their heart is saying. I utilize parts work like IFS. I utilize somatic body work, clearing blocks. I utilize my own ability to push against the stories you tell yourself and the stories you try to tell me. Oh, a big one. Um, and one of the beautiful things about being in that mixed gender kind of container is that men project on me. So they're and I welcome their projections. So all of the projections can come up, all of the value negative emotions like rage, like resentment, like anger, like bitterness, like all of these emotions that can't be held or that are usually not held very well in our lived experience, they get to come out and have their say. And once that happens, and once those can kind of be cleared or at least given a little space to breathe, the heart usually reveals itself really beautifully. And then once we work with the heart and we clear what needs to be cleared, we integrate what needs to be integrated, then we start working into the maturation of the heart. So taking the heart from that child place of everyone around me needs to behave or else to the adult perspective of I'm actually able to act of my own accord and being generous is an organic place to be and I know how to receive and I know what to do when I'm not receiving. Then so that's the adult orientation of the heart. And then I have multiple practices that bring that start to invite the primal energy back online. And I, as priestess and as the feminine frequency in the dance, I become his mirror. So I'm saying, okay, I feel the primal coming online, but where's your heart?
Hmm.
And so then he stops, he slows down, says, okay, bringing my heart back online. And it's a consistent like strengthening. Cause like I said, it's not just going to plug in and then you're good to go. It's that constant, okay, bringing it back together, reconnecting, pulling the thread, weaving them together over and over and over until the oftentimes it just clicks. It's like, oh, this feels good. Like this feels better than trying to keep these things separated. And then after that, it's gangbusters. Like we can move into initiating into that king energy,
Hmm.
like the service king. How does the king hold a kingdom? What are the benefits of being in a kingdom? How does he serve and how does he allow himself to be served?
I'd love to add in a little bit of what I've learned on my own as a man, because I think what you're sharing is beautiful working with you, or if we have a conscious partner, we can do some of those things. And I've also discovered for myself that it is something I can practice getting aroused and allowing myself to tap into some more of that primal.
Mhm.
And in fact, it's actually safer that way because I'm in my own space. There's
Mhm.
nothing that can go wrong. And so I want to add to that too, as men, that we can also practice getting aroused, bringing in deeper, more fuller breath, moving our bodies in more primal ways,
Mhm.
making sounds. That's one that I love to encourage as
Mhm.
well, is like making freaking primal sounds. I start grunting and making these sounds, and it's like anything, it's a practice, it's a discovery
Mhm.
that if we're blessed, we can bring it into relationships, but we can definitely start to, in the same way that we're practicing with nourishment, we can practice with this primal aspect as well.
Yeah.
And I think that was good. I love that you brought the head, the heart, and the cock in, because I can start to look at myself. What do what do I lead with the most?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm lead with my mind. Oh, I'm kind of like mind. I think so many men are mind predominant, maybe cock second, and then heart third.
Actually, what I have found is that most men are heart-led, but it's distorted.
Hmm.
There's a deep need, and these are, of course, the men that find
Yeah,
themselves
yeah,
to me and step into the work. So my
totally,
my source examples are pretty biased.
totally, totally.
But the heart-led or the heart of men is so exquisite and it so deeply desires to serve the feminine.
Will
And
you
there
just say
is
that one more time? I think that's like just so nice for the men listeners to hear about their heart.
the heart of men is breathtakingly exquisite.
Hmm.
It truly is. That's one of the things that um, I feel deeply fortunate to witness is when men show me their full heart and trust me with it, because that's profound.
It brings me back to this idea of that we're really in this together, that we as men can get to that place where we show our hearts more, where we feel safe, that we can hold ourselves to show our hearts in that
Mhm.
way, and how that will make an impact on the world.
Yeah,
I
I think I mean this I like that you brought up this factor of safety. That's a huge subject in the conversation around conscious relating. And what I teach the men that I work with is safety is not found outside of you, ever. Not ever. Safety is an inside job. And even releasing and along the path, releasing the need for safety, because it's a construct oftentimes that keeps us within our rigid patterns. And the more you do that shadow work and the more you expand your bucket into the aquifer, the need for safety becomes minuscule, because you build that trust within yourself and you build more of a consciousness of what we're here to do, which really isn't to be safe in a real way. Like we didn't come here to be safe.
totally.
And so demanding our safety and especially demanding someone else provide safety for us, while that can be a needed and beautiful thing along the path, it is not the destination.
I love that, because that's arousal. That's That's vitality. That's aliveness. That's truth. The truth is my heart can stop in any moment. A tree can fall on me. A car can hit me. Like all of these things. And there are some amazing men leaders that say that. They're like, because a lot of people say, "Oh, we're creating these safe spaces." It's like, no, there's no safe space. You are not safe. And that it can only be created within. So I was just like, I love that. And it's also in the thread of like, yeah, the primal, the arousal, the vitality, the aliveness of truth. One more question that I think would be beautiful to end with, and then we'll close up here is around having a fear of going in this direction, tapping more into my primal, tapping more into what I want, getting more into this, like Jordan Peterson says, the being dangerous but choosing not to be, kind of this power. The fear that my relationship won't last through it. We talked briefly about it, but
Yeah,
we've got another question here about, um, yeah, what more can we add to men that have that kind of fear of, wow, if I tap into this, my relationship might not be able to hold it.
yeah. Um, Sometimes that's true. But in my experience, uh, I have worked with women who carry that story, and much of it becomes her responsibility to some degree to do that inner work and to really start pushing against that narrative that this is a problem or this needs to not exist. And I find that women are incredibly receptive to challenging that narrative because I think like our internal our most holistic and healthsome existence as the feminine is all of everything. And so when we have stories and contractions and rigidity about what must be, it is incredibly uncomfortable. We just get very used to the discomfort. And so we think that that's all there is. When I can work with women to start to push against and release all of that, again, I find them very receptive to that. So sometimes it's the women's responsibility. They need to be about their work. Um, as far as pushing against what may the story or the narrative or the fear story really, like if I do this work, my relationship may fall apart. Um, that feels like it needs to be deeply questioned, because you may be projecting what your own erroneous belief about the masculine primal is. So
Ooh,
you may have
damn.
you may have um, believed that story that the masculine primal is nothing but dangerous, and you have to question that and take that apart because with attunement and with that heart-led primal, it serves the feminine. So there has to be a rejection of your own internal prejudice against yourself. You may have adopted certain perspectives about masculinity, that it's bad, wrong, and dangerous. Many men that I work with have, like one in particular that I work with, he began working with me with the belief that men's sexuality was dangerous.
Yeah.
And if you like, that breaks my heart because you are living within a body that houses men's sexuality. And then you have a belief that it's bad, wrong, and dangerous. And that's got to create so much like excruciating dissonance within. So he and I have just like relentlessly challenged that narrative, and come to a place where he fully accepts the power and the beautiful impact that his sexuality can have on the women around him.
Mm.
Whether that And that can be anything from being in a social moment with a woman to all the way being in an intimate relationship, like long-term committed relationship. A man in his grounded like stillness and like full self-acceptance and that service king energy completely blesses the woman around him, no question. So that's probably where I would start. Is we're going to start taking apart your own internal narratives about what this is.
And there is, I think, part of that healthy, heart-led masculine that is the willingness to face truth. If that's true, if that happens and it's true, then it's true. If I go on this path and it rattles my relationship, then the relationship was built on unstable ground, on masks, on things that actually weren't a true blend. And obviously, like you talked about, there's a lot of complexity to this, families and homes, and it gets deep.
Yeah,
But there is part of that masculine energy that is, I'm willing to face the challenges of life
yeah.
as I
I
navigate it.
actually I have a beautiful story about that. Um, I had a man approach me wanting to work with me, and we kept in contact over several months, and he had that fear of my wife isn't going to like this. I'm afraid my relationship's going to fall apart if I move forward with this because this was like a him thing, and he had his habit or his self-protective mechanism was to do only what she approved of. And that was his, childhood pattern. And so we kind of danced around working together for several months. And he finally reached out and was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm doing this. I'm making the decision. What is the cost? Send me the contract. And he made this decision. And then we scheduled to begin the following week. In that time, his wife asked him for a divorce. So I think it was like the next day after he signed the
Wow.
contract, his wife asked for a divorce. And he
Wow.
he sent me a text message and was like, "Well, it happened. Like she just asked me for a divorce." He was like, "I actually feel pretty good. Like I
Wow.
feel really free. I'm moving into this powerful position. I'm doing what my body and my mind feels like is the next best step for me." Um, and then we get on the call, and I'm expecting, like, whew, okay, like we're going to be working through divorce. Like, this is a different dynamic than I was expecting. He gets on the call, and he's like, we have had the most authentic conversations that we've ever had. We have told truths that we've never been able to tell each other. We have gotten deeper than we've ever been. And now I've been working with them for about a month or so. They're having the best sex of their entire relationship. They're so happy. They're
Wow.
like ridiculously in love. And so he had to take that step
Yeah.
and not only take the step, but have the worst thing that he could imagine happen
Yeah.
and hold it. And because he was able to do that from this place of like empowerment and love and compassion, and he even said, I'm proud of her for asking for the divorce. Like that's her stepping into what she needs. And that's beautiful.
Yeah.
But now they've been able to create, and now I'm helping him to create this like magnificent relationship beyond what either of them could imagine a month ago when they were discussing divorce. So you never know when you start challenging the story, like the narrative that exists in your mind. Your mind wants to keep you homogenous. It wants to keep you the same.
Yeah.
So it's going to throw everything at you as soon as you start moving into these places of expansion. And when you start moving into these places of expansion, you get to hold the openness and curiosity of what can happen much in a more expanded way than you ever thought you could.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It's been so rich. I look forward to putting this podcast episode out and sharing it with people.
Mm,
What ways can people be in touch with you? I'll put this stuff obviously in the description as well,
mm.
but what are the best ways for people to interact with you, to be in touch with you, etc.?
Yeah, so the bulk of my work, I do virtual work, but I also do my immersions are my favorite thing that I do. They're 3 days long, in person, one on one. I design them around you, and it's a huge pivot. Um, in order to apply for that, because you have to be ready for that caliber of work. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram and just reach out to me, send me a message, and I'll get you started on what it takes. We'll have a call one on one and we'll feel into what can be created.
Beautiful. And as I said, I'll put those links in the description. Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you, everybody, for listening and enjoying this podcast. This is the Men and Sex podcast. We will have many more episodes to come. And once again, I hope that you normalize these conversations in your own life, in your relationship. We live in a world that has made this taboo, and there's so much life waiting for us, vitality, nourishment on the other side of having these conversations that feel
Mhm.
awkward and
Yeah.
weird at first. So step into
And
it, be brave.
play and curiosity and all of the good stuff.
That's how we're going to end it. Thank you so much.
All right.